buckled up here and ready to go for at least another 2.5 hours at the Capitol.
Okay, stand by there, Craig. We'll be back with you as we watch these departures. Just past the top of the hour now, 1 o'clock Eastern in Washington. President Trump just sworn in as the 47th President of the United States.
We heard a performance a moment ago of the national anthem as the inauguration ceremony inside the Capitol Rotunda appears to be winding down. People are now exiting, but the president still has a very packed day ahead, as Craig noted.
Yeah, he just laid out President Trump will head toward the Capital One Arena in Washington after this business here at the Capitol. It has turned into a viewing site and an overflow room of sort for his supporters after today's ceremony had to be moved indoors due to the frigid weather here in Washington. Before that, he's also expected to sign a bunch of executive orders. There will be a signing ceremony at the Capitol, but also further signings at the Capital One Arena in front of that rally crowd.
Let's bring in NBC News presidential historian Michael Beschloss. Michael, thank you for being with us. I want to get your first impressions of what the president laid out as to the state of America now and where he wants to take the country.
Well, I think the way to look at this, Lester and Savannah, is to compare it to recent inaugurals and recent inaugural addresses in modern times. And you have to say that the sweep of his ambitions, you heard it stated today, perhaps more than ever before, in foreign policy, to change America's role, change the way these elements of Africa, and also change American culture and society.
Hey, Mike, unfortunately, your audio is breaking up, so I think we're going to take a moment and let that get sorted out and work here in the room here.
Well, former presidents are exiting, and I thought it was very notable that when the Clintons were about to step out, the adult children, well, they're all adults now, of President Trump, Don Jr. and Ivanka appear to extend a hand to Hillary Clinton and maybe President Clinton as well. That's an unusual moment as the Trump family was exiting before the former presidents. And this, of course, is where the farewell happens. We did not see this 4 years ago because Donald Trump left from Joint Base Andrews earlier in the day when he was still in office.
He did not attend the inauguration.
And let's just note, while there is a stately pace for these traditional events here, the incoming Trump administration, the new Trump administration, they are off and running. The socials are now flipped over to the 47th president. Their social media sites, whitehouse.gov. They are already having staff at work in place to initiate all of the things that you heard the president lay out in that speech. You've got a number of changeovers already. The TSA administrator, according to our reporting here at NBC News, has now stepped aside or been fired. You have also a new, the acting FBI director as well has stepped down. The work is already being done. And by the way, the legal challenge is already filed now, several against that new Department of Governmental Efficiency, which the president has talked about that Elon Musk will be.
I'm guessing that coat check is closed here because the folks are pouring out sans coats on a pretty chilly day here in Washington.
Well, to the point that Hallie makes, first of all, what we heard from President Trump was a list of the robust agenda that he wants to start working on today, so much so that I had some Republicans texting me saying, this has the markings to some extent of a State of the Union address. And look at the optics inside the room. The Republicans standing to cheer, the Democrats seated in some moments, former President Biden now, former Vice President Kamala Harris with stern expressions as he was quite critical of their record on various issues.
President Trump making his own news, saying the Gulf of Mexico will now be referred to as the Gulf of America, saying he's renaming, taking Mount McKinley back. It was Denali. You could have an argument about starting at Denali, becoming Mount McKinley, back to Denali. Well, he wants it to be called Mount McKinley once again as members of the Supreme Court depart, and we're starting to see now what we will is a departure of President Biden and President Trump and Melania Trump there to usher them off to their departure by helicopter and then off to Andrews Air Force Base, where by tradition there's a ceremony and sometimes staffers gather there, Biden staffers. We've got Ryan in the East Front. So Ryan, I don't know if you've got a vantage point here. Ryan Nobles, our Capitol Hill correspondent.
Yeah, that's right, Savannah. And we can see the current president, the newly inaugurated President Donald Trump, escorting the former President Joe Biden out here onto the East Front, where Joe Biden will ultimately get on the Marine One helicopter and depart to Joint Base Andrews. Now, this was a tradition that was started back in 1977 when Gerald Ford left Washington for the final time aboard Marine One. Traditionally, outgoing presidents would leave the Capitol by train. In fact, they would sometimes just walk from the East Front over to Union Station and get on aboard a train to travel home. That's how many presidents did before Ford. But once this new tradition was instituted, this became the regular. Of course, this did not happen 4 years ago because Donald Trump chose not to participate in the inauguration activities. Instead, Vice President Pence came all by himself and was walked out by then the newly inaugurated Vice President Kamala Harris. They were in masks at the time, if you remember, because that was the height of COVID. And then Mike Pence left in a car. So this is an opportunity here to demonstrate the peaceful transfer of power. As you see, the new president speaking to the former president and speaking to Vice President Harris as well. It is bitterly cold out here right now. The east front of the Capitol often becomes a wind tunnel just by the way that it is configured up here on Capitol Hill. And the wind is whipping through this part of Washington right now. That wind will kick up even more once the rotors of Marine One start rotating in order to lift Marine One off of the east front of the Capitol and then take the Bidens over to Joint Base Andrews.
Here's the first departure. We just saw the goodbyes there with Kamala Harris.
That's right.
And her husband, Doug Emhoff, being greeted by President Trump, who, of course, prevailed in the election, and then a big warm hug from the Bidens and Dr. Biden. And so the next departure will be of the Bidens themselves.
And we should point out when the former president gets on that aircraft, it will no longer be Marine One for this mission. It'll have a different call sign.
Nighthawk 46.
Oh, there we go, Nighthawk 46.
And much has been made of the relationship between Harris and Emhoff and the Bidens, and we really saw a demonstration, a very physical one there with that warm embrace of the closeness. Their political lives were intertwined by the decision Joe Biden made to name her as his running mate and then to serve with her as vice president. And now that relationship takes a new turn. We don't know what Kamala Harris and her future will look like. We know that the former president, now Joe Biden, and Dr. Jill Biden will be traveling to Santa Barbara County and spending some time in Santa Ynez at a private home there to have a little rest and vacation.
It's the same area, I believe, that they spent time after the Democratic convention back in the summer. Another difficult moment, presumably, of course, for President Biden and former President Biden. And the former First Lady there has had and expressed publicly great frustration with the way that she felt her husband was treated over the summer by the Democratic Party, talking about, for example, former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, saying we were friends for 50 years. Pelosi seen in many ways as one of the architects ultimately forcing out Joe Biden to get Kamala Harris into that race.
And leaving the cold of Washington is probably, there are many metaphors to that.
Yes, but I think that it does speak to, first of all, how powerful these images are. Images that I think the country is to some extent hungry for. These images of bipartisanship, the peaceful transfer of power, very different images than the ones we saw 4 years ago. And again, the question, what will become of the Democratic Party now?
I mean, it's just, the word is class. It's a classy thing to do.
Yes.
It's classy to come to your former rival's inauguration. It's classy to see them off. It's classy to have, a Marine One with a special designation. It's what we expect and hope and aspire to in this country, which actually brings us directly to John Meacham, presidential historian who has done some work for President Biden in writing speeches and so forth. But what are your thoughts, John, as we see these images, but also looking back at the inaugural address we just heard?
Well, let's start with President Biden.